A little YouTube narration to start. First, you click on the upper right for settings, and then you select playback speed, and then you can pick the speed you want to hear this at if the speed of it isn't to your satisfaction. Thank you. Hello, my name is Bob White. I'm making this video for the first time I've done anything like this, and it's not a professional production, so bear with me. But it's the story of a slave named Jack. Jack, in June of 1854, was accused and convicted of murdering John D Barrow in a cornfield where he and Barrow were plowing. John D. Barrow and my great great grandfather, Silas Mentor Jr., had rented uh, the labor of Jack for 1 year. They rented him from a man in Patrick County, about 30 miles away, uh, named Austin Jones. It appears that, as you'll see in this, Jack had been rented by other people in the community before, so he was appears to have been fairly well known in the community. Uh, I'm not going to say a whole lot about this because I want you to form your own opinions as you go along, but I am going to discuss it at length after this at the conclusion of the scrolling document that you're about to see and that I'm going to narrate. Uh, I will let you form your own opinions, and then I'll tell you what mine is at the end of this based on my uh, love of history since I was a child and researching the history of that part of the world. Uh, the research I did in genealogy, which has been since the early 90s, I've been pretty active in that. And also from my career in the criminal justice field, specifically, most of my 30 years was spent looking at the crimes people committed, why they may have committed them, and what the circumstances were of those crimes. So it kind of ties into this story you're going to hear today or read today. Uh, a few technical things. The person that transcribed this in the courtroom and in the field, likely for the inquest, they were probably using a quill pen and writing as fast as they could to get the information down. The punctuation, capitalization, things like that are very different from what we would use today. There are a lot of dashes taking the place of periods and commas. Not always capitalization where we might put it. I the only corrections I've really made in this document were in a couple of cases where it just wasn't clear based on their punctuation, and I either capitalized or put a comma or a period in where it needed it for clarification. Uh, the uh, the original is available to you. I actually sent this document out to a number of people, but like I say, I'm not necessarily that proficient at sharing documents and things like that. And the it's on Google Drive, it's on Dropbox, and I'll put some links to those in the video at the end of the video in the YouTube narrate or description. You'll be able to find links, and you can look to the original document if you choose. As a matter of fact, as this document scrolls, you'll see numbers bolded that appear periodically in sequence going through the document. Those are the actual page breaks on the original document, so it gives you a way to refer what page you need to go to take a look at what it actually looked like on the original. The I put the names of witnesses in bold and tried to separate those a little bit so that it would be easier to distinguish the different persons in here. The other thing is they very often in the text refer to a witness saying something, but then something that witness said about something another witness said. And you might hear me during the narration just interject a name where it doesn't appear clear who it is just by saying the witness. And in a couple of cases, I think they did straighten that out. But I will kind of cut it off here, other than I'm going to show you a picture of the approximate or Google map image of the area where this likely happened, and also a street view of where Green Hill Drive crosses Leatherwood Creek, is right below reservoir number 2 for the city of Martinsville, which may very well cover the ground. That reservoir may be over top of the ground where this took place. But I wanted you to get a look below the dam at sort of what the lay of the land was. As you're listening to this, generally what you've got are two groups of people. You've got John D. Barrow and Jack working in a cornfield that's got about knee-high corn in it that they are plowing, each of them with a single horse plow, working that field. They had hoed in that field earlier that morning and left 2 hoes in the field. Across from them, across the creek bottom, and apparently up a little bit on the other side, were John D. Barrow's children, Mary Belcher, I'll go into that later, and his sons, John and William, who had, with the exception of an area blocked by a couple of large sycamore trees, had a view across and could hear across the field and across the creek bottom. And that's the general lay of the land. And with that, I'll move on to showing you a little bit of what it looks like before I start the narration. If you have any questions, please feel free. Those of y'all that have my phone number, give me a call or send me an email. The email will be on the YouTube page. You won't be able to share this YouTube video right now if you choose to, because I've got it set just to go to the people that I'm sending it to initially, and hopefully we'll get some feedback if I need to improve anything in this. I think this has a great potential for educational purposes, but for clarification, particularly in some of the debates that are going on today. Again, thank you. State of Virginia, Henry County to wit. An inquisition taken in the field of John D. Barrow, deceased, in the county of Henry on the 14th day of June in the year 1854, before William J. Hamlet, a coroner. Upon the view of the body of John D. Barrow, there lying dead, the person sworn to inquire when, how, and by what means the said John D. Barrow came to his death, upon their oaths do say that the said John D. Barrow came to his death on the morning of the 14th day of June, 1854, by a blow received near the top of his head with an instrument something like a hilling hoe, fracturing the skull bone, which blow was given by a Negro man named Jack, the property of Austin Jones of the county of Patrick, hired to Silas Mentor, Jr. of Henry County, in testimony whereof the said coroner and jurors have hereto set their hands. Signed, William J. Hamlet, coroner, J. L. Gravely, George Reynolds, Michael Griggs, Thomas Lester, Coleman T. Matthew, Wesley Griggs, John A. Griggs, Joseph Slayton, Charles Cole, Thomas Stultz, John R. Gravely, Joseph T. Gravely. Inquest. The evidence of Mary Belcher, taken before the coroner's jury in the county of Henry in the cornfield of John Barrow, after having been first sworn, says, I was standing on the hill near where the dead body lay, and saw a Negro man named Jack standing nearby where the deceased was plowing. And in time I saw the deceased, him lay the plow on the ground. He was going off near the place where the Negro man was, and while down he turned over and put his hand on his head. And I went up to him and found him dead, with blood running from his mouth and nose. The Negro man called to the little son of the deceased, and then unhitched the horse from the plow and rode off in haste. The little boy answered the Negro man and then called to him 3 or 4 times and asked him what was the matter, but received no answer as I heard. Question by Coroner: was there any other person in the field near the deceased? Answer: no one. Question by jury: was Mr. Barrow as usual this morning, one at breakfast? Answer: he was, except that he was a little angry. Question: what was the cause, do you think, or know, of his being angry? Answer: the Negro man left home last night without leave and did not return home this morning until after day, and then went into the stable loft and went to sleep, I suppose, and it was hard to wake him, or he would not answer if he was awake for some time, and afterwards he came to the cornfield and would not go back again to the house to get his breakfast as usual, and further, this informant saith not. State of Virginia, County of Henry, to wit, to Jasper Wooten, Sheriff of said county and the keeper of the jail of said county, whereas, by an inquisition duly taken before me, William J. Hamlet, the coroner of the county of Henry, on the 14th day of June, in the year 1854, on the view of the body of John D. Barrow lying dead in the said county. Jack, a Negro man, slave, who was present at the taking of the said inquisition, stands charged with the willful murder of the deceased, John D. Barrow. These are therefore by virtue of my office, and in the name of the Commonwealth of Virginia, to command you to said sheriff forthwith to convey the said Negro man, Jack, to the jail of the said county, and safely to deliver him, together with this warrant, to the keeper of the said jail. And there are likewise by virtue of my office to command you to keep the keeper of the city jail to receive the body of the said Negro man, Jack, into your custody, and him safely keep in said jail until he thence be discharged by due course of law. And for your so doing, this shall your warrant given under my hand and sealed this 14th day of June, 1854. William J. Hamlet, coroner, seal. Witnesses. At a court held for Henry County on 10th July, 1854, sitting as a court of all for and terminus for the trial of a slave named Jack, the property of Austin Jones, charged with felony in murdering John D. Barrow, a white man of said county. The following witnesses were introduced on behalf of the Commonwealth, who declared as follows. Mary Belcher, a white lady, declared that she lived at the house of deceased when the murder was committed. Jack, the prisoner, lived with the decedent as a hireling at that time. Jack was hired by Mr. Minner, who contracted along with the decedent had the control and management of the prisoner. She saw decedent that who was as well as common and was a healthy man and enjoyed the uniform good health and was lean in person. Saw decedent soon after breakfast, hitching his horse to the plow in the field. Jack, the prisoner, was plowing in the field at the same time. When he first hitched his horse and decedent commenced plowing, this was between 7 and 8 a.m. on 14 June, 1854. Decedent plowed to 4 rows, did not see him afterwards till she saw him walking briskly from his horse, staggering as he went, and seemed to be endeavoring to run. He was going in the direction of the woods and not towards his house. Soon after, she saw him walking, as above stated, Witness looked before being told by his son that his father was down and saw the decedent on the ground with his hand to his head. Witness was between 300 and 400 yards from decedent when he fell and had a distinct view of him when down from where witness stood. Witness could not see the plow from where she was at that time because two sycamore trees intervened. Neither prisoner or his plow was in view at the time. Did not hear prisoner or decedent say anything before decedent fell. After decedent had fallen, not more than a minute afterwards, she heard prisoner holler to his horse, and immediately afterwards, prisoner called decedent's little son, who asked him several times what he wanted, but prisoner made no answer. Witness was certain prisoner hollered to his horse, "Get up." Prisoner knew witness was in the field in that he saw her before decedent fell. Prisoner, in calling decedent's son, said, "Oh, William." When prisoner called, as witness saw him on hitching his horse from the plow, and he made off immediately to the decedent's house. Prisoner, when he called the boy, was about 3 yards from decedent and at his plow. Prisoner was near enough to hear the boy when he asked him what. Before seeing decedent down, she advanced to, and upon getting where she found him dead, I saw blood running out of his right nostril and right side, a wound near the crown of his head inclining to the left. When witness reached decedent, he died was about 8 yards distance from his plow. Made no examination to see if any tracks were to be found near the prisoner. When about 3 yards from the decedent as above stated, stood and looked in the face of the decedent and raised up and called little boy in the matter before stated. Prisoner was plowing the same way decedent was going when he was walking as above stated. When decedent left the plow, he went on by his horse and fell about 8 yards in front of the decedent's horse. Prisoner was at the time plowing in the same direction behind and about 9 yards behind. But when witness got to decedent, prisoners and plowed on and in the row and faced the plow of the decedent about 9 yards. First time she saw the decedent after he fell, prisoner was standing at the plow, but did not have hold of it and was looking in the direction of witness and boy. Saw no hose lying about decedent when she got where he was, and did not look for any. Decedent's plow line was then hitched over his plow handle. Did not see prisoner have anything in his hands. Knew of no difficulty that morning between prisoner and decedent. Decedent waked up prisoner that morning, who was asleep in the stable loft, and heard prisoner say that decedent waked him again after breakfast in the field. On that morning, prisoner and decedent would work corn with a hose in the field till breakfast, and when decedent came out from breakfast, he carried 2 hoes with him to the field, and upon getting there, he found prisoner asleep the second time, as prisoner informed her, and was waked up by the decedent for the second time that morning. Prisoner did not go to breakfast that morning. Decedent was not angry at the breakfast table that morning. In same conversations above reference to prisoner said decedent found him asleep, but did not get angry at it. Was well acquainted with the horse decedent was plowing. The horse was very gentle, work horse, and never knew him to kick or run away. Prisoner, when he left the plow, did not go towards witness, but off at near a right angle. The first time witness saw prisoner the decedent had fallen. He was stooping down and looking into his face, as above stated, and this was before a prisoner called the boy. From the decedent's plow to the nearest part of the woods was not 100 yards. The corn at the time was not knee-high in the field. Witness and decedent got to the field that morning about the same and went out to the field to gather in corn, hay with decedent, and was in plain view of each other with the exception of the two sycamores intervening. Witness was on one hill and prisoner and decedent on the opposite hill, and witness saw no other human in the field that morning, but prisoner, and does not think anybody could have approached decedent without her seeing him, as she had a plain view of the field decedent was in. If any other prisoner had been in the field when decedent fell, he could have left the field by a hollow without being seen by her. This hollow was not more than 100 or 200 yards from the decedent's plow. Does not think any person could have gone to the decedent in the field at morning and off again without being seen by her. On cross-examination, the little boy went out into the field to work that morning along with witness. Boy was in 3 feet of witness when she first saw decedent after he left his plow. Before breakfast, decedent and prisoner hoed corn together till breakfast. Decedent was not more than 4 yards from his plow when she first saw him, walking off briskly from where decedent's plow was standing to the bushes at the edge of the field of the wood was about 12 yards. If prisoner or any other person had gone to where decedent's plow was, she could not have seen them, and consequence of the said sycamores intervening. Decedent could have been approached by a person coming down the creek bank without being seen by her, being wholly out of her view. About the time decedent fell, she heard prisoner holler to his horse, and then a few seconds she saw prisoner coming on with his plow, and saw him stop to look into the face of the decedent as before stated. Prisoner then unhitched his horse. The traces of decedent's horse was both unhitched and lying on the ground when she got to the decedent's horse. In the same conversation with prisoner in which he said decedent was not angry with him, the prisoner said after he turned his plow around at the end of the row, he, prisoner, did not notice the decedent till he saw him down, and said he did not know how decedent came down. The horse decedent was plowing was shod behind with old shoes on both feet. Decedent and prisoner plowed 2 furrows each before the decedent left his plow. They both commenced plowing at the same time, and decedent about 3 feet ahead. In chief, the corn and rows in the field where they were plowing were not more than 10 or 12 yards long. The 2 sycamore trees stood close together, were very tall and about the size of common apple trees. John Barrow, son of the decedent, a boy about 11 years of age, stated that he went out to work that morning in the field with his sister, the witness, who deposed above about the time decedent and prisoner went to plowing. A short time after they commenced plowing, he saw the decedent going off from his plow at a brisk walk, about a half run, staggering, and went about 3 yards and fell. Witness remarked to his sister his father was down. She said she reckoned he was after a groundhog. Witness remarked to her, he fell like someone that was dead, and said he was going to him. His sister said if anything was the matter with decedent, she reckoned prisoner would call them. His sister got to decedent before witness did. Witness saw decedent turned over after he fell and put his hand to his head. Decedent fell somewhat on his side. After witness saw decedent fall, he, the witness, worked 3 hills of corn before the prisoner called his brother William, who was an older brother and at the time was working along with the witness and his sister. Excuse me. The decedent, when witness got to him, was lying on his right side, with blood running out of his mouth, nose, and from a wound on his head. After prisoner called William, asked him 3 times what he wanted, but prisoner made no answer. Prisoner was all the time in hearing of where he, the witness, was. Prisoner took the gear off the horse he was plowing and rode off to W. John Gravely's. Decedent was well that morning. Witness was about 3 or 4 yards from his sister when decedent fell. Witness could not see the plow of decedent from where he was when decedent fell. Could have seen any person if he had come into the field other than the prisoner before they could have got out, as he looked so quick after his father fell. The ground was hard and has not been plowed since the corn was planted, so no stick, switch, or rock where decedent fell or near about. The horse was gentle and never knew him to kick, but once, which was several years, when he kicked his father, the decedent, on the thigh and lamed him for several days. The witness and the children frequently played with the horse, but never knew him to kick at any other time. The 2 hoes with which prisoner and decedent had been hoeing corn in the morning were lying at about half a yard from decedent's patch of beans, near where they were plowing, which they had chopped that morning before breakfast down to see the corn so they could plow it. Never knew prisoner to be impudent to decedent or to give him a short word. Does not know whether prisoner was drinking that morning. Knew of no difficulty that decedent had with. Decedent seemed that morning to be in a very good humor. Cross-examination. Prisoner, after he unhitched his horse, rode rapidly to decedent's house before he went to W. John Gravely. The 2 hoes were lying together, one across the other. Prisoner's hoe was lying on that of the decedent. Dr. Henry Peters stated that he was requested by the coroner to examine the body of decedent the evening after his death. Did examine the body, head of the decedent, but could see no signs of violence that could have produced death. He then shaved his head and found a small wound, something like 1 inch long, on the left side of the head, about 1 inch from the crown. He then made a cranial incision immediately above the wound and dissected the corner of the incisions down the skull, laying the skull bare about 2 inches in diameter, then scraped the skull carefully with a knife and detected a fracture of the skull bone or notch is something like 3 fractures, about 1.5 inches apart, somewhat of a triangular shape. The fractures approached but did not unite and seemed to have been made by one blow. The blood was oozing through the fractures, and one bled laterally freely. Was satisfied the fractures were sufficient to have caused death. To have produced such fractures on that part of the head would have required very considerable violence, such as a blow from a stick, a hoe, or the kick of a horse. was like the opinion that the blow must have fallen between the fractures. There was no depression of the skull. The skin was broken over the wound, and the blood oozed out, with some blood on the hair, some little blood occasionally oozing out of the mouth and nose. The injury could not have been the result of any natural cause, and that the blow causing the fractures must have fallen on that part of the head where the wound was located. The wound was on the character to have produced instant death, and the witness could have come to no other rational conclusion as to the cause of this. On the same side of the head was a slight scratch or wound he thinks was produced by the decedent falling on his head. Did not examine the brain. Had known the decedent for several years, and that it was very unusual for a person of size and make of the decedent to die of apoplexy, though it was sometimes the case that persons of every make and size die of. Thinks it possible that a wound of the character designated might have been produced by the kick of a horse. Thinks the eye of a hoe would much more likely to have produced such a wound. The crown of the head was about an inch from the center of the triangular fracture. One of the fractures was about an inch from the crown and inclining to them. Saw that the hat of the decedent, but could not see any satisfactory evidence of a blow having fallen on the hat. He did not measure the eye of the hoe, but when applying of the hoe eye, the measure formulated by another person to the fracture found them to confirm with the measure. Thinks it probable that hat would have been cut if the fracture had been produced by the kick of a horse. Saw nothing upon the hoe indicating that a blow had been inflicted. The hoe was a very heavy one. The bruise, he thinks, extended over about the same surface of the fracture. The skin was broken in a straight line from one of the fractures to another, and does not think it possible such a wound could have been produced by the kick of a horse. Thinks the wound on the scalp indicated the character of the instrument with which it was inflicted. Cross-examination. Even after he had shaved the head, he did not at first discover any wound sufficient to produce death. There was no appearance on the scalp done, enabled him to form any opinion as to the character of the force applied. It was not probable that a ball could have produced such a fracture. Thinks the eye of an axe or a bludgeon might have produced such a fracture. Thinks it probable from the condition of the hat, a chief's hat, was such as to induce him to believe that it was off the head when the blow was inflicted, though it was probable the hat might have been soft from the moisture of the morning, and by consequence not have been cut by the force used, even if on the head at the time. It is a matter of frequent occurrence that persons recover from injuries producing greater fractures of the skull than that found on the head of the decedent. Had no fixed opinion as to the character of the instrument used apart from all the attendant circumstances. Thinks it probable he would not have come to the conclusion that the blow was inflicted with some sort of instrument like a hoe. The eye of a hoe was not square with a slight bulge on the eye. Had not a shadow of a doubt that the force producing the fractures caused death. What had doubts as to the character of the instrument with which the wound was inflicted. Thinks if the decedent had died of apoplexy, he would have, from the examination, made may have discovered some symptoms of the disease. Witness. Reverend Silas Minner stated that he saw the body of the decedent between 3 and 4 o'clock on the evening of his death. Dr. Peters was at the time examining the head of the decedent. Witness was looking on very particularly, but did not discover any wound until the head was shaved. After the head was shaved, he discovered pretty much what was stated by doctor in relation to the location and character of the wound. Dr. Peters remarked that it was possible that the wound might have been produced by the fall. Witness went to the place where the decedent fell and examined, but saw no rock or large gravel there, except one rock which he understood was carried there after his death. Captain Gravely measured the hoe eye and applied the measure of the wound and found it too long to correspond with the wound. The hoe had a square eye like that of a grubbing hoe. It was measured again at the incision by the witness, and the lash measure extended one corner of the eye to the other across the eye, and the measure, when applied, correspondent with the fracture, in other words, with the two little broken places in the skull. Did not discover that the skin was lifted up or down from the wound. The plows of decedent and prisoner, where he saw there were some 35, 40, or 50 yards apart. The plow of the prisoner was some 8 or 9 yards from where he understood decedent fell. Thinks the rows where they were plowing were some 45 or 50 yards long. The place where the body of the decedent lay was some 2 rows below the last furrow run by him. The decedent was shown the plows where he understood they were found after decedent fell, but does not know if they had been moved or not. Was not acquainted with the character of the prisoner. Does not know if decedent was in the habit of wearing his hat. It was a question on this word trim, chief hat, low crown, and when put on the witness's head, came flat down upon his head. After the examination of the body was over, witness discovered a red place on the right arm of the decedent above his elbow and about 1.5 inches long, and seemed to have been produced from a lick with a switch or an edged tool. Cross-examination. The field in which the plowing was going on had 10 or more acres of clear land, which field he thinks was in full view of the field on the opposite side of the bottom, where the boy and lady were at work, except a part near the bottom. Decedent was plowing some few rows above the prisoner. That decedent was plowing in one direction, a few rows above the prisoner in an opposite direction, till he got to the end of the row, which was a short row. The plow of the prisoner was then turned around and slanted in the direction of the decedent, and that the place shown the witness where the decedent fell was about 9 yards from the prisoner's plow, rather between where the decedent ran his last furrow and where the prisoner's other plow stood. From where the plow of the decedent lay to when he fell was some 35 or 40 yards. That from the end of the last furrow run by the prisoner to where the prisoner's plow stood, was but a few steps, and the place where prisoner's plow stood was nearly opposite to where the body of the decedent fell. That there was a large cleared opening above where the decedent's plow stood, and the opposite end of the row was near the bushes at the edge of the woods. From decedent's plow to said bushes was some 45 or 50 yards. Silas Mentor Jr., witness, stated that he saw the body of the decedent between 9 and 10 o'clock a.m. of the day of his death, and found Miss Mary Belcher, Charles Cole, and decedent's wife there. Decedent's head was then lying in the lap of his wife, and witness, thinking she had better be relieved, told prisoner to take hold of decedent's head and lay it on the ground. Prisoner made a step or two in that direction, but failed to take hold of the head, though told as often as 3 times. Mr. Cole then moved the head. Witness then told the prisoner to go and get a hoe, which prisoner did, and Mr. Cole scraped the place with the hoe for the body of the decedent. Witness then directed prisoner to take hold of the head and shoulder of decedent. Witness repeated the command, but prisoner did not obey. But when told by Mr. Cole to take hold as directed by the witness, he then did so. Prisoner had hold of decedent's body on the same side where Mr. Cole was before he took hold of the head and shoulders of the decedent. When prisoner was directed to take hold of the head, he, the prisoner, was standing as near the head as to the body. The prisoner manifested so much disinclination to take hold of the head of the decedent as to make an impression on the mind of the witness. Witness hired the prisoner for the year 1854 and placed him under the management and control of the decedent. The prisoner never had on any former occasion refused to obey the witness. Witness and decedent were cropping in co-partnership the present year. Prisoner, when told to take hold of the body, had on a hat low down over the prisoner's face, looking down in the face of the decedent. Prisoner told witness how he and decedent were plowing that morning. Prisoner said decedent had finished running a hill of the corn on one side of the gully, and the prisoner himself was turning around at the gully, and that decedent passed on by the prisoner and was going back to the end of the row. Decedent had plowed from that. After prisoner turned around, he was going back the same way the decedent was when he fell. Prisoner said he never saw decedent any more till he got to the end of the short row where his horse held up his head, and he, the prisoner, looked and saw decedent down. Witness then asked prisoner if he went to the decedent after he fell. Prisoner said he did. Witness then asked prisoner what decedent said. Prisoner said decedent said nothing. Asked prisoner if decedent looked pale in the face. Prisoner said he did not when he left, but did when he returned from Mr. Gravely's. Prisoner said he did not see decedent breathe. This conversation occurred when the prisoner came after the witness, Silas Mentor Jr. When prisoner went for witness, he, the prisoner hollered. Witness asked him, the prisoner, what he wanted. Prisoner answered and said his master John, the decedent, was down and that he did not know what the matter was with him. The conversation about the manner of plowing occurred after the witness, Silas Mentor Jr., reached the body of the decedent. The hoe, which a prisoner got when he sent for one, was lying about 40 yards of the decedent's body, across the last furrow run by the prisoner. Decedent fell in the direction he was going, feet towards where the prisoner was. Prisoner said no conversation occurred between decedent and himself. When decedent passed him, as before stated, the distance from where the prisoner's plow stood and where the decedent fell was 8 or 9 yards, and the prisoner's plow stood where the prisoner unhitched his horse. Excuse me. Witness, after fixing some bushes over the decedent's body, Then he went there to the head of the decedent, and then saw decedent's track going across the gully in the direction of the place where the prisoner said he, the prisoner, was turning when the decedent passed him. As before stated, saw tracks of the decedent to in about 3 feet of the turning point. Witness walked on and saw tracks of decedent 3 or 4 yards beyond the turning point, leading in the direction of the place where decedent fell. From the said turning point to where decedent fell was about 40 yards. Prisoner assigned as a reason why he did not see decedent when he fell was that he, the prisoner, was plowing carefully and turned more carefully than usual. After decedent left the turning point, his tracks seemed as if he'd staggered from one row to the next tracks of the decedent, off from the handle of his plow abruptly. I then tracked over 2 gullies and did not see that he was then staggering. Saw tracks between the handles of the plow and the end of the beam near the swing tree, but does not know whose tracks they were. Witness knew the tracks of the decedent because decedent wore shoes that were right and left, and that witness's shoes were made by the decedent upon the same last his decedent's was, and that he, the witness, applied his shoes to the tracks and found them to correspond. The hoe, which the prisoner said was his, lay where the prisoner said he was turning when the decedent passed him, as aforesaid. This was the same hoe measured by the other witness, Reverend Silas Mentor, and that said hoe was lying across the last furrow which the prisoner ran. The ground on which he tracked decedent was freshly plowed, where the prisoner turned around at the gully. The ground was very hard, and the plow had the appearance of having been pushed into the ground very deeply. The plow was then raised up out of the ground and put in the shallower. Witness examined to see what caused or induced prisoner to take his plow out of the ground, but found none, no root or rock or any other obstruction. Was well acquainted with the horse decedent plowed that day. Horse was very gentle and dull and had to be whipped to get him along. Never knew the horse to kick, but heard decedent say that several years ago the said horse did kick him. After the death of the decedent, witness tried to get the horse to kick by whipping him around the legs and otherwise, but did not succeed in getting him to do so. Thinks the prisoner is a very sensible boy, but never observed any peculiar shrewdness or tact about him. When asked what decedent said as prisoner fell, as before stated, prisoner said the decedent groaned like a hog knocked on the head. Cross-examination. From where the prisoner turned at the gully to where the plow of decedent stood was about 15 feet. Thinks good feelings existed between decedent and prisoner, and that they never had any difficulty that he knew of, but heard decedent say that he would on one occasion have whipped the prisoner for jerking his horse, but from fear of frightening his wife. Prisoner came fully up to the description given of him by Mr. King. After prisoner aided about the corpse, as before stated, he, the witness, directed prisoner to go after Mr. Griggs and others, and directed him to go and return quickly, which he did. Prisoner had frequent opportunities of escaping before arrested, but did not escape. Witness, after his return from going after Mr. Griggs, witness directed prisoner to crop his hands, which he did, and witness then tied him. Prisoner was very humble, seemed scared. but made no resistance. Prisoner seemed badly scared when he came after witness, as before stated. Witness Charles Cole. Found decedent dead when he reached the place where referred to by other witnesses. Mr. Gravely was there when he arrived. Saw no tracks leading from decedent's plow to the point where the prisoner turned at the end of the row. Witness and Mr. Gravely examined to ascertain whether there had been any fight between prisoner and decedent, but saw no switches or other signs of a fight between from decedent's plow to where the prisoner turned around was some 12 or 15 yards. Saw no signs of the prisoner going to decedent or decedent going to the prisoner, though he examined minutely for that purpose, and saw no tracks leading from decedent's plow to the turning point of the prisoner. The tracks from decedent's plow lead right to the point where the decedent fell and did not pass by the turning point of prisoner. Decedent's tracks indicated that he was staggering as he went on. Knew the tracks he saw near decedent's plow were the same he saw near where the decedent fell. Jeff Gravely was witness when he made the examination and did the tracking. When witness tracked from decedent's plow, he did not do so track by track, and could not say they did not go by the turning point of the prisoner, but does not think the tracks went by that point. The tracking was about 9 o'clock of that morning, and before the witness Silas Mentor Jr. arrived. Was with said Mentor when Mentor was tracking part of the time, but did not then notice particularly, as the witness had been around tracking before. Observed the staggering tracks about halfway from the plow of the decedent to where he fell, and did notice for that sooner. Saw 2 hoes lying near the end of the row where the decedent turned around, and one near the turning point of decedent to have been driven over by him, turning at the end of the row, the other hoe lower down nearer where the prisoner had been plowing. After decedent had been sheltered by the bushes as before stated, he asked prisoner about the matter, who made a statement about it, and then a half hour afterwards made a different statement in some particulars. Believes Mentor made a much more minute examination of the ground from the decedent's plow to the turning point of prisoner's row than he, the witness, did. Cross-examination. The 2 hoes might be some 10 or 15 feet apart, and was certain neither hoe was as low down as where prisoner's plow was. From the time witness examined till Mentor made his examination was some 3/4 of an hour, and in that interval several persons, members of the decedent's family, had been walking about the place. Was certain the hoe was not in the ground plowed by prisoner that morning. This fact he knew and saw it with his own eyes. Thinks the prisoner was tied before he made either of the conflicting statements above reference to. Lived about a half mile from decedent. Witness Jefferson Gravely stated that prisoner came after witness that morning, and witness got to the lady about 9 a.m. and made not much examination before witness Cole got there. Saw no signs of life in decedent when he got there. Blood was then running out of decedent's mouth and nose. When witness reached the line, was laying down on the ground, and the traces of decedent's horse were hitched, and so remained all day. The witness untied the harness and threw off the gear. Witness was the first person who reached there besides the family, and that Mr. Cole was the next person that arrived. Observed the position of the plows and hoes before Mr. Cole arrived. Saw decedent's plow across the gully and saw 2 or 3 places where the plow scraped like the horse had made some jumps. The first 2 scratches were made by the point of the plow, and at the next the plow fell on the side. Prisoner's hoe was lying across the furrow of decedent's plow. A step or so behind where the plow of decedent jumped out of the ground. The hoe of the decedent lay in the gully. The first hoe was the one sent for when Mentor arrived. Saw the track there. When prisoner got to the house of the witness, he said decedent was dying. Witness asked why he thought so. Prisoner said because the decedent was making noise like a hog knocked in the head. After witness reached the house, he indicated prisoner to go for Mr. Mentor, which he did. Thinks the prisoner had on shoes. That morning saw tracks of decedent from his plow to where he fell, making long steps. Decedent went first above his own plowing and came below before he fell. From the nearest point of the prisoner plowing to the decedent's tracks for some 10 steps. Tracked the decedent from his plow and in company with Mr. Cole to near where he fell. Can't say the decedent did not go by where prisoner turned after leaving his plow. There was a little rise in the ground between where prisoner turned and where decedent fell, that he thinks prevented prisoner from seeing him. Prisoner said decedent went off in a hurry towards the woods, passed the prisoner without speaking, and said that there had been no difficulty between them that morning. Witness saw no rocks about where the decedent fell. Thought he saw prisoner's tracks from where he turned his plow to where the decedent's plow stood, which he thought were the prisoner's tracks, but did not know whose they were. The track was made with old shoes, which he thought were the prisoner's, but did not make an examination of prisoner's shoes to see whether they corresponded with the tracks. He observed the tracks as soon as he threw off the gear, as before stated. Cross-examination. Was not certain that the prisoner was barefoot that morning, and does not know whether he had on shoes or not, but thinks he did. Where decedent was plowing the ground was old and mellow, and had been cleared for many years. The 2 plows were something like 30 steps apart. Silas Mentor Jr., re-examining, stated that prisoner was barefoot that morning when he came to his house. Witness, Mrs. Barrow, wife of the decedent, stated that some 15 minutes after decedent left his breakfast, prisoner rode up to the yard of the decedent, where witness was, and informed witness that decedent was dead. Witness replied that if he was dead, he, the prisoner, killed him. Prisoner made no answer, but asked witness where to go, understanding him to mean where he should go to inform some of the neighbors of the occurrence. Witness directed him to Mr. Jeff Gravely. The witness then took up her little girl and went out to the field where decedent was. Jeff Gravely was the first person who got there besides the family. When she got to the field, found Miss Mary Belcher and her son John there, and no other person. When decedent was at breakfast, he seemed to be in a very good humor. Prisoner did not come to breakfast that morning, and she never knew him to fail before. Witness: William Barrow, son of the decedent, a boy in his 10th year, stated that the morning his father fell in the field, were working in a field in sight and saw prisoner sitting down on his plow. He saw the prisoner sitting on his plow about a minute, saw his father plowing, and afterwards saw him walking along the first row pretty fast, and did seem to go straight, and thought he was after a groundhog, as there were some ground holes near where his father fell. Saw him put his hand to his head. Prisoner called him pretty loud, saying, "Oh, Billy." Witness asked him what he wanted 2 or 3 times, what he wanted, but prisoner gave him no answer. After prisoner called witness, he spoke to his horse, saying, "Get up." Witness was then about 400 yards distance in plain view, and could have seen all of it but for a poplar and some willows that intervened. Witness went to his father after he fell, along with his sister, saw no person passing into and out of the field, and he went on and thinks he would have seen a person pass out of the field if they had done so. Did not ask the prisoner anything about the matter, and did not know why prisoner did not go to breakfast that morning. Knew of no difficulty between them, and heard no loud talking in that direction that morning before his father's fall. When witness got to his father, found his plow sticking in the ground, with the traces still hitched and the lines lying on the ground. Mr. Gravely was the next white person that came. Did not go to the plow before Mr. Gravely came, and did not touch the hose, which he saw lying there. One of the hose, believes, was lying across the last furrow run by his father in plowing that morning, between where the plow of his father stood and where he fell. Knew where prisoner was plowing that morning. Was certain the hoe lay across the furrow as above stated. The horse plowed by the decedent was a very gentle horse, had curried and plowed him frequently, could do most anything with horse, and never knew him to kick. Cross-examination. Did not see prisoner till he was out to the field. Never knew him to go barefooted, and he, prisoner, wore one of his father's shoes, and the other was a pegged store shoe. Prisoner, when sitting on his plow, seemed to be cleaning out his shoe. Thinks he had been out at work about 25 minutes before prisoner called witness. Wesley Griggs, stated the prisoner came to his field where he was at work that morning and said his Mas John, the decedent, was dead, and when asked what the matter did nothing. Prisoner said he was careful about turning his horse around that morning when he was plowing, and turned very carefully. The prisoner passed him at the time. Decedent took the line off his hand, left his plow, and tracked on back the way he came from. Prisoner saw no more till he got to the end the end of the row, when the prisoner's horse, held up his head. Prisoner looked and saw decedent was down. Prisoner then asked witness the way to his father's. Witness was summoned on the coroner's jury and went to where the body was. Prisoner was there tied, and witness held him by the line. At that time, the prisoner was asked a good many questions. Among other questions, the prisoner who was accused with the death denied it, and said if they could find any wound on the decedent, he, prisoner, would confess he did, and that there was no other person there at the time but himself and the decedent. Prisoner further stated that decedent woke him up in that morning, that he was about half asleep when decedent returned from breakfast. And when asked where he went to the night before, he said he went over to Jabez Dyer to see a sick Negro. And when asked if the decedent had not forbid his going there, he said decedent did not wish him to go there, as the sick Negro had the scarlet fever, and that he, the prisoner, would be liable to catch it. And said that the evening before he told decedent he was going there that night, and that the decedent made no reply to it. He further stated that there were spirits when they sat up with the sick Negro, and that he, the prisoner, drank unknown too much, and that was the reason he was asleep that morning, having lost sleep the night before, and sitting up with the sick Negro, and that he felt badly in consequence. Witness got there about 9 or 10 o'clock that morning and found a good many persons there when he arrived. Mrs. Silas Minner stated that before the death of the decedent, not many months before, prisoner came home one Sunday and witness directed him to carry Mrs. Belcher, a pair of gloves she left there, Mrs. Belcher being at the time a member of the decedent's family. Prisoner said he did not have to be carrying her gloves home. That someone present replied that he might get a whipping tomorrow. Prisoner replied that if decedent whipped him, he would do so but once, and that if he was whipped, Mr. Minner had to do it. Prisoner did not then carry the gloves, but did so afterwards. Witness, Jim, a slave, stated that he belonged to Mr. Eggleton, Mike Eggleton, never heard prisoner make any threats against decedent, but heard him in February last say that he liked his home right nice, and said that if he did not intend to take any whipping from anyone except his master and his master Silas Minner, and if they did, they had better make a sure lick, as his would be the next. Decedent was not mentioned in their conversation that the witness recollects. Witness, Edmund, a slave, the property of William Salmon, lived this year with Willis Gravely. One Sunday he came up here to the courthouse and saw prisoner in jail. Asked him what he was doing in there. Prisoner, he said was in there for killing the decedent. Witness then asked prisoner how he killed him, and he said he knocked him in the head with a hoe. This was since prisoner was put in jail and charged with the said offense. Had heard before that he was put in jail, and witness asked him why he was in jail for. Prisoner said for killing the decedent. Did not know the prisoner, was alone at the time, and thinks he heard distinctly what prisoner said. Prisoner at the time was in the east end of the jail upstairs. Cross-examination. This conversation occurred on a Sunday of Leatherwood meeting. 2 preaching days ago. First told these facts to his master, Willis Gravely. Could at the time see the prisoner through the bars at the window. Have not seen prisoners since. Have not been in the jail during the time of the court. Saw his sister and Mrs. Bryant that day, but does not know that any person saw him besides his sister. Was certain this was on a Leatherwood meeting day. His sister told him his master was gone to Richmond at that time. This conversation, he thinks, occurred about 2 Sundays ago on a Leatherwood meeting day when his master was going to Richmond. Evidence for the defense. Witness, Thomas Shelton, stated that he was acquainted with the prisoner and had known him for 20 years or more, and during all of that time lived within a mile of the prisoner's master, that he was always a submissive boy. On one occasion, while acting as a patroller, he arrested the prisoner and whipped him. Prisoner made no resistance to him at the time. 3 other persons were along with the witness at that time. Witness, William Critz, Jr., stated that he had known the prisoner ever since he was a boy, knew the general character of the prisoner, and said it was good, except running from his master and running about of nights, had known the patrollers to whip him. Witness, Ben King, stated he had known the prisoner for last 18 years and had the management of him the year before, last one being informed by his master. The prisoner, year before last, once being informed by his master, the prisoner was in the habit of staying out late on Monday mornings. Witness gave him his orders against that habit. Some 6 weeks after the prisoner did not return till sunup one Monday morning, but upon calling him to account, prisoner made a good excuse and was excused by the witness. On one other occasion, he gave him 5, and I'm not sure of this word, switches for another similar offense. Prisoner was generally very humble and submissive and never resisted his authority or disobeyed him in any other respect. At this time, I don't have any other records regarding the trial other than these documents. I hope to do some more research in Virginia on it, but ultimately, Jack's fate was that he was executed. He was found guilty and executed, and we only know that it was on a Tuesday. I found this clipping online. I think it may have come from the Richmond Dispatch, but I'm not positive. It's not a very good copy. The Negro slave who killed Mr. John Barrow in Henry County was hung last Tuesday at Martinsville. While under the gallows, he disowned the commission of the hard deed for which he was about to suffer death, but admitted that he was with him all the time and was at a loss to know how he received the wounds on his head, which caused his death. A large number of spectators were present to witness the execution.